I just need to make sure sound is there. Hold on one second.
Interest on international security, information technology.
Sound check, sound check. We will begin shortly. Welcome everyone to our Armenian-American Heritage Month speaker series. My name is Taline Partikin. I am the teacher specialist for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'll be helping moderate the event for today. We have a great lineup of speakers for the next 2 weeks that they will share their stories of how they have made a difference. Today's speaker is not only an author, but also GUSD's teacher specialist for secondary ELA and ELD, and a teammate of ours from Teaching and Learning Department. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today's speaker, Laura Gaboudian.
Thank you so much, Taline, for that introduction. And thank you, teachers and students, for joining me today for this presentation. I'm really excited to be with you today, and I'm just going to share my screen so that we can get started. All right, so you should see the cover of my book now, Under the Light of the Moon. And so today we're really going to talk about why I decided to write this book and why this story is so important to me, as well as some of the historical aspects of this story. And so there I am. You just got introduced to me, and I know I've met some of you before. And there's another picture there. So that's my husband, Autumn, and he's the author. He's the illustrator of the book. So he drew all of the pictures that you see in the book. He illustrated that beautiful cover, and really made this book come to life with me. And so first, I wanted to start with this quote that probably you understand very well because you're all writers. And when you're writing about something, you want to write about what you know about, what is important to you. And so that's kind of where my story begins with this book. So why did Autumn and I create this book? And it starts with family. And so here you can see a really old photograph. And there's lots of children, there are some adults in front. And where that arrow is pointing, that was one of my great-grandmothers. And she was an orphan of the Armenian Genocide. So when children are placed in an orphanage, it means that they no longer have parents, or their parents can no longer take care of them. And so there were many orphanages like this because of the Armenian Genocide. And my great-grandmother was in one of them. And so she saved this photo her whole life, as well as this photo. She's the girl on the right in this photo, and she's with two of her friends from the orphanage. And as you can imagine, as an orphan, she didn't have many belongings, but she had these two photos. And when her older cousin found her at the orphanage and brought her to America, she didn't really have many things to bring with her, but she brought these two photos because she made lots of friends at the orphanage who helped her get through a really difficult time. And there were also these adults that took care of her at the orphanage and really helped her. And so these two photos were very special to her, and she kept them in a photo album her whole life so that they wouldn't get ruined. And now I have these photos, and they're really important and special to me. And so really, to understand this story, we have to talk about geography. a little to really understand where everything was happening in the world. And so we can see that yellow star, and that's where we are in California. And then on the map, you see that red area. And that was an area in the world called the Ottoman Empire. And much of that area is now the country of Turkey. So that's where my great grandmother lived and all of my great grandparents lived. And there was a very large Armenian population there for many, 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 many years. And so that's where all of this takes place. And that's where the Armenian Genocide occurred. And so we can see here that same area, if we zoom in, is the country of Turkey. And we can see to the right, there's Armenia, which is much smaller than what it used to be. And also Azerbaijan to the right of Armenia. And so Armenia is a lot smaller and still almost surrounded by countries that still do not want Armenia to exist. And so going back to the history over 100 years ago, when the Armenian Genocide happened, it was because the Turkish government only wanted Turkish people in Turkey, and they were not welcoming to Armenians or other people. And there were articles like this one that you see, this headline is from the New York Times over 100 years ago. So there were hundreds of articles like this published about what was happening. So Americans knew what was happening and how horrible it was. That there were a large number of people who were in trouble and needed help. And here we can see another map of that region. And all of those red dots that you see, those were places where Armenians lived peacefully for thousands of years. But then they were forced to leave their homes. And all of those lines show the routes that they took, where they had to march for days and days, leaving their homes. And so lots of different places and lots of people having to leave their homes. And there were often marches like this where they would just have to walk for such a long time and carry whatever they could. There were also sometimes train cars that carried Armenians away, and these train cars were actually meant for animals. They weren't really meant for people. And so Armenian people were treated horribly. And so they basically had a very short time to just pack up whatever they could and leave their homes forever. And just imagine if you were told that you had to leave your home and you could only take what you could carry. That wouldn't be much, right? So that would be a really hard decision too, to just have to leave and figure out what you could take. And so I just want you to think about this. So in this situation with Armenian Genocide, there were so many people who needed help. There was a huge crisis with, lots of different ways that, people needed help. But now I just want you to think about a time when you helped someone. Why did that person need help? And what did you do to help them? And so I'm going to give you an example because, here we're talking about the Armenian Genocide, which was a huge issue where so many people needed serious help. But really, we help people in different ways every day. And so maybe you have a younger brother or sister, and sometimes they don't understand their homework. So you show them how to do it. That's a way that you're helping someone. So just think about a time when you help someone, and maybe if there are any volunteers, teachers, if you have a volunteer in your class that would like to share, you can just share in the chat how your students are helping people, and we can just share some of those out. So let's just take a minute now. Think about a time when you helped someone. Oh, that's great. I can see some students sharing. So Annabelle helped her sister with homework, helping friends go to the nurse when they don't feel well, helping mom with dishes at home, helping with chores, giving a homeless person food, helping a brother with math homework, giving a hug to someone who's having a hard time. So there's so many ways that all of you are helping people every day, and that's so wonderful. Keep sharing, and we'll read out more of them a little bit later. So now going back to the Armenian Genocide and everything that my great-grandmother was going through, remember there were so many people who needed help, so many kids like my great-grandmother. And so because of that, America created an organization called Near East Religt. And the goal was to help all of the Armenians who were suffering. And Near East Religt created posters like this one. And they would post them all over the United States in public places. So everyone knew what was happening and everyone knew how serious it was. And we can see how serious it was. There were almost 4 million starving people, 4 million Armenians, and also Greek and Assyrian people who just did not even have food. And so now I have another question for you, and maybe we can also answer this in the chat as well. So remember, we looked at that world map a little while ago. We saw where the United States is compared to where the Ottoman Empire was. It's really far away. So how do you think Americans helped the Armenian orphans if they lived so far away? And think about this, this was over 100 years ago. So think about that question for a minute and let's see if we get some answers in the chat. Okay, so they sent wagons, they sent clothes and food. Wow, so many ideas. Boats, okay. So you are correct if you said boats or ships, because remember there was the huge Atlantic Ocean in between the United States and the Ottoman Empire. And so there were no airplanes at that point that could travel that far. And so they had to rely on ships. And so there were lots of meetings happening, groups of people in different cities in the United States trying to figure out how to help. And they would collect food, clothing, medicine, and load them on big ships like this one. And sometimes there were even Americans who were not Armenian, but they actually got on the ships and volunteered and went to the orphanages and took care of the children. So you can see this woman was at one of the orphanages taking care of all of these babies. And some of the people were doctors and nurses. And there were lots of orphans and Armenian people who needed medical attention and medical care. So doctors and nurses got on the ships from America and traveled all the way over to the orphanages to take care of anyone who was sick. So there were lots of different ways that people were helping. And so here's an illustration from the book, and it's the first illustration in Under Light of the Moon, actually. And it shows Americans lining up to donate clothing for Armenians. And so there were different donation spots, and a lot of these donations, sort of like drop-offs, were at local schools. And so people would just go to the local school with bags of clothing that they didn't need anymore, and they would donate them for the Armenians. And so then we come to Jackie Coogan, who he's a main character in my book, and he was a real person. He was the most famous child actor in the 1920s. He was in all of the popular movies at that time. And Jackie Coogan, heard about what was going on with the Armenian Genocide and all of the orphans and survivors who needed lots of help. And so Jackie wanted to get involved. And so Jackie collaborated with Near East Relief. And there's another real photo of Jackie with Mr. Dodge from Near East Relief. And they're looking at a map of where all of the orphanages were located. And Jackie had some ideas about how to fundraise for the Armenian orphans. And you can see some similarities between the photo and the illustration on the book cover that Autumn worked on. And so when Autumn was working on the illustrations, he pulled some real photos of Jackie, and he wanted to base some of the illustrations on real photos, since this is a historical fiction. It has some real history embedded in the story. And so, for instance, with the cover of the book, we can see that it's not the exact same image, but the way that Jackie is posed and standing is the same. And so Jackie was fundraising all over the United States for Armenian orphans. So we can see him here with bundles of food that would get put on a ship. And we can see him here collecting cans of milk for orphans. And remember, they couldn't put food on the ships that would spoil because it was a long journey. So they had to collect food that was non-perishable, that wouldn't spoil easily. And Jackie worked with the local Boy Scouts a lot to do fundraising. And so here's another illustration from my book. And so this is Jackie's circus fundraiser. And so this really happened. So Jackie at the time was making a movie. He was in a movie about a circus. And he converted the movie set into a real circus one day. And he invited kids all over to come to this circus. And instead of paying with money to get into the circus, the kids brought food or clothing for the Armenian orphans. And this was a huge fundraiser. It was just one event, but Jackie was able to collect so many items to send to the orphans. And so Jackie kept fundraising all over the United States. He actually got on a train in California and went across the United States, stopping in all of the major cities, doing big fundraiser events. And finally, he arrived in New York City. And he had done so much and collected so many items to donate that in New York City, they had a huge parade for him. And the mayor showed up and everyone was thanking him for everything he had done. And remember, he was only 8 or 9 years old when he did all of this too. So pretty amazing. But Jackie wasn't done. He still wanted to do more. So he actually got all of those items, the food and the clothing and the medicine, put them on a ship, and then he boarded the ship. He got on the ship and decided to go to one of the orphanages that was located in Athens, Greece. He wanted to personally deliver a bunch of the items to the orphans, and he wanted to meet some of the orphans. So here's another photo of the Zappeion orphanage in Athens, Greece in 1925. And this is a picture of all of the orphans waiting for Jackie to arrive. And they were there to greet him and thank him. And so remember, when we look at this picture, so this was one orphanage. Look how many kids are in this picture. And then remember the picture I showed you of my great grandmother and the orphanage that she was in. There were so many kids in that picture. Here's a photo of another orphanage in Lebanon. So remember, there were so many orphanages like this with so many children who needed help, and Jackie was doing his part to help as much as he could. And Near East Relief was a pretty incredible organization. So they raised over $117 million. And that was, 100 years ago, over 100 years ago. And that's actually worth $3 billion today. So a huge amount of support. And this is a photo of another orphanage where the children were so grateful. And so they lined up outside and they actually spelled out, "America, we thank you," because they were so grateful for all of the help. And so now I just wanted to talk a little bit about everything that's happened in Artsakh recently and continues to happen. And if you don't know, Artsakh is an indigenous Armenian region, but once again, Armenians are being forced out of their homes, and their land is being taken away. And so we can see a lot of similarities of what happened in the Armenian Genocide and what's happening again today. And we don't want history to repeat itself. And so we need to continue to make a difference. And so what can we do to help? So one thing that we can all do is there are still a lot of soldiers in Armenia who are in the hospital and they're recovering. And so something that we can do to support them is to just write them letters of support and let them know that we appreciate them and we hope that they get better soon. And these letters are still being collected at Abriel Bookstore right here in Glendale. So maybe teachers, that's something that you can do as a project with your students. And I believe that they're also collecting gently used books for the soldiers to read because they have a lot of downtime and they enjoy reading like we all do. And so if there's any books you have that you can donate, you can bring those to Abriel Bookstore as well. And something that I'm doing is I continue to sell my book on my website, but for important causes. And so there are lots of great organizations like Code 3 Angels, like Project Mighty, and they support Artsakh families who need homes or need clothing or need food. And so I donate proceeds from my book sales to these organizations to help Armenian people of Artsakh who are in need. And so now we're going to read the first chapter of Under the Light of the Moon together, and I'll have it displayed on my PowerPoint so that you can follow along in case you don't have the book in front of you. And then after that, we'll have some time for questions. And so something I wanted to point out to all of you at the end of my book, I included a glossary because a lot of, there are some unfamiliar words in my book or unfamiliar places. And especially if students are learning about this history for the first time and they've never heard a presentation like this one that we're having right now, this glossary will be helpful for them as they read the book. And then I also included a foreword because again, there are a lot of kids who read my book, but they don't have a presentation like this. And so they haven't learned about this history and they don't have all of this background knowledge. So this foreword just gives them a little background knowledge about everything that happened with Armenian Genocide and with Near East Relief and Jackie Coogan, so that they understand as they start to read the story. And so now I will start reading chapter 1 and you can follow along. Jackie knew it was time to do something. It was in the news constantly, and he often overheard his parents talking about the poor Armenian children. Their parents were taken away and they were all alone. Jackie couldn't wait any longer. It was time to get involved. Mama, Papa, I'm going to help the Armenian orphans. They have suffered so much and it's not fair. American children can come together to help our Armenian friends. We can do it. Jackie, that's a wonderful idea, Mama exclaimed. "We'll help you, Jackie," his papa replied. Later that day, Jackie and his parents did some research and found out about a wonderful American organization called Near East Religt, which had been formed to help Armenian refugees and orphans. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my glossary because we just came across the word refugees, and that might be a new word for some of us. So I'm going back to my glossary and it's in ABC order. So, okay, I see the word refugee under R, and it says someone who leaves his or her country because it is dangerous and moves to a new country, usually with help from the government. Okay, that makes more sense now. So Near East Religt was formed to help Armenians who were in trouble and needed help. And after, Jackie heard there was going to be a clothing drive for the orphans that week called Near East Religt Bundle Day. So he opened his closet, peered inside, and began pulling out gently worn clothing and piling it on his bedroom floor. Jackie's mother helped him fill a large sack with clothes, sweaters, jackets, pants, shirts, and shoes, and all sorts of colors and materials, so that they could bring them to the clothing drive. Jackie, along with other famous actors and children, personally delivered his humongous bundle of clothing to the local collection station, which was at a nearby school. Near East Religt wrote about their generosity and reminded others that it is never too late to bundle up a bundle for Near East orphans. So I'm going to pause right here for a minute. So remember, we saw this illustration earlier, and people are donating clothing at a local school for the Armenian orphans. And this is actually true how Jackie first got involved with Near East Religt. The first thing he did was actually donate a bundle of clothing, and then he wanted to do more. Later that week, Jackie and his parents met with Mr. Dodge from Near East Religt. "Jackie, we're so pleased you want to help. You have so many fans from your movies. You'll be a great role model, showing that anyone, no matter how young or old, can make a difference in the world. Now let's get to work," Mr. Dodge proclaimed. Jackie's parents beamed with pride. Here's a photo of one of the orphans, Lucine. Her name means moon in Armenian. Lucine's father was taken away, and then she was separated from her mother when they were forced to march into the Syrian desert. Our volunteers found her alone and afraid in Aleppo, Syria, so they brought her with other Armenian orphans to Athens, Greece. Now she lives in one of the orphanages there. Mr. Dodge smiled. "You're doing a great thing, Jackie. Your work will help Lucine and all of her friends." So here's the first moment in the book where we meet one of the other main characters, Lucine. And Lucine is based on my great-grandmother, who, as we know, was an orphan of the genocide. And so we get introduced to her here, but really, as you continue to read the book, she plays a main role throughout the story, and you get to know her more. "Mr. Dodge," Jackie began, "I'm honored to be able to volunteer with Near East Religt to help Lucine and all of the other orphans. In fact, I already have some ideas. I want to make sure that more kids know about this serious situation, and I want to show them that there's still a lot we can do in America to help our Armenian friends who are suffering." "That sounds wonderful, Jackie. What did you have in mind?" asked Mr. Dodge. "Well, Mr. Dodge, I think I know just what to do to get more kids involved. Let's show my new movie, Trouble, and instead of buying a ticket, we can ask everyone to bring clothing for the orphans. One bundle of clothing will equal one movie ticket. What do you think?" Mr. Dodge exclaimed, "That's a brilliant idea, Jackie. Now let's get to work to make it happen." And so Jackie's work began. And so that's how chapter 1 ends. And if you remember, earlier we talked about Jackie's circus fundraiser, which really happened. Well, he had another cool fundraiser, which is mentioned at the end of this chapter, the movie fundraiser. So he had another movie, Trouble. And once again, on a specific day, instead of paying for a movie ticket with money, kids brought clothing for the orphans. They brought bundles of clothing, and that's how they were able to come and see the movie. And movie theaters throughout the United States did this on a specific day. And so it was a huge another huge fundraiser that Jackie orchestrated. And so as you continue to read the book, you'll see more and more what Jackie did and how he helped. And you'll get to know one of the orphans a lot more and what she was going through at that time. And so now that brings us to questions. So I think maybe the best way is to have them add any questions to the chat, and then I'll try to answer as many as possible. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So if anyone has any questions, you can add them to the chat.
We have a question, please. One of my students.
Sure.
If like I see on the news a lot, they're talking how Russia is attacking Ukraine, but I noticed that when Turkey was attacking Artsakh like 1 or 2 years ago, they weren't talking much about it.
That's a really good point that you bring up. So it's a huge problem that Artsakh is still being attacked and it's never in the news, right? And that makes us very upset that it seems like it's not important to the rest of the world. So that's why it's so important for all of us, whether we're Armenian or not Armenian, to know about what's happening and to tell other people about it, to raise awareness. So thank you for bringing that up. And so I see a lot of questions coming in the chat. So I'm going to try to scroll back up. Sure. Okay. I see a question. How old is Jackie now? That's a great question. So Jackie would be really old now if he was still alive, because remember, all of this happened over 100 years ago. So Jackie's no longer alive, but he did live a really long life, and he actually continued acting throughout adulthood. And if anyone's familiar with the old TV show, The Addams Family, Jackie Coogan played Uncle Fester in The Addams Family. So that's what a lot of people know him from. But he was a very successful actor for many years. I see another question. When did you write the book? So my book was published in 2018, but I started writing it maybe 5 years earlier, and I would write a draft and then I would make some revisions and then I would put it away for a while because I wasn't happy with it. And then I would take it out again, make some more revisions, change things. And so it was a huge process of, as you probably know, when you write stories, you know, you want it to be perfect. And so you keep making those revisions until you get it to where you want to be.
We have another question. Are you planning on writing any more books?
Thank you for that question. I would love to write another book. And I really want my next book to focus on what's happening in Artsakh, to raise more awareness so that more kids hear about what's happening, and so that more people know about it. What else do we have? Let's see.
Couple questions about donations and organizations. We will include that information in the recording on the GUSD website under inclusion diversity, where all the recordings will be. So we'll make sure that's part of that.
Oh, there's a question I see about Jackie finding my great grandmother. So I just want to clarify a little. So there are real historical elements that are part of the book, but there are also fictional elements that I added. And so that's why it's historical fiction. So some real parts are that Jackie was a real person and he did all of this great work with Near East Religt. Another real part is that my great grandmother and hundreds of thousands of other kids were orphans of the Armenian Genocide. But when you read the story and you see Jackie and Lucine interact, so that part of the story is a fictional part that I added to the story. So there's some historical parts and then there's some fictional parts. Let's see what else. So many questions, so many great questions.
Lots of great questions.
Yeah. So what made you write this book? So kind of like what I explained in the beginning, that this is really important history that I want to make sure that everyone knows about. And I remember when I was a child in school, there were no books about my history. No one ever talked about my Armenian culture or history in school. And so I wanted to make sure that a book does exist for Armenian children, but also for non-Armenian children to learn about this important history. So those are the two reasons why I wrote the book. How did they leave the orphanage? So, well, all of the orphans kind of have a different story, but for my great-grandmother, she had a much older cousin who survived, and he found her at the orphanage, and he brought her to America in 1920. And so everyone kind of has a different story, like where maybe a different family member found them, and maybe they ended up in Lebanon, maybe they ended up in Egypt, in Ethiopia, in Argentina, right? There are Armenians all over the world because of this history, and everyone got scattered everywhere. Let's see.
How long did Jackie continue to help, and did he help others? From Armand.
So Jackie continued to help for several years. He did several years of work with Near East Religt. And then even as he got older, he was a soldier in World War II. And so he was always very involved in trying to help others, and still maintained his acting career somehow. Let's see. Oh, did Jackie ever go to Armenia? So Jackie did not go to Armenia, but he did visit a bunch of the orphans in Athens, Greece. And actually, when he was on his way there, he stopped in Italy and went to the Vatican, and the Pope actually gave him a special award for all of the work that he did too.
Some students are wondering if you've been to Artsakh in Armenia.
I have many times actually. And so I've been to Western Armenia also, which is where my great grandparents were from, which is now part of Turkey. And so I've been there. And I've also been to present day Armenia and to Artsakh. Let's see. How many books have you written? So this is my first book, but hopefully not my last. How did your older cousin find your great grandmother? So during that time, since there were so many orphans, the orphanages would post pictures of the orphans in newspapers and post ads in newspapers of the orphans, and sometimes family members who were looking for other family would also post ads in the newspapers. And so that's how he found her. And then he had to take some time to get her a passport and get some money to bring her on a ship all the way to America. So it took a little time.
We have some sixth graders from Glen Oaks that wanted to know, was the United States the primary country that took in Armenian refugees at the time?
There were so many countries that took in Armenian refugees, and that's kind of why we're all spread out all over the world, right? So there's huge Armenian communities in Lebanon. There was a big Armenian community in Jerusalem, in different countries in South America, in Ethiopia. So there were lots of countries where Armenians were refugees, and they went to all of these different countries.
Some students want to know if you speak Armenian and where you live.
So, okay, so I am originally from Rhode Island, all the way on the East Coast. And that's where my great grandparents settled after the Armenian Genocide. So there's a small Armenian community there still. But now I live here, and I'm a third generation Armenian. So I speak Armenian, but sometimes I feel like I'm not fluent enough just because my family has been here for a few generations and I didn't have the opportunity to go to Armenian school growing up where I would really learn how to read and write. So then as an adult, I took some classes to improve my reading and writing too. And it's really important to maintain your native language as best as possible, your heritage language. So I hope all of you do that as well. Let's see.
And we'll take one more question. And Mountain Avenue, how can our students help support the war effort? This will be our last question for today.
So I think the best way to support, there's a couple of things, just raising awareness. So keep telling people about what's happening, because remember, we don't see it on the news, and there are really horrible things that are still happening every day in Artsakh. And so we need to raise awareness and keep telling people. And if you can write letters to the soldiers to keep their spirits up, that is a great way to help. Of course, if you are able to donate, whether it's like clothing or money, that is always helpful. And I know a lot of us were doing that back in 2020 when the war first started. But there's many things that we can do, but I think it would be great to have so many letters from Glendale students sent to the soldiers. I think that would make them really happy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lara. I wanted to thank Lara Gaboudian for joining us today and being part of our presentations, as well as all the students that joined us today. Thank you, teachers, for broadcasting it into your classrooms. We will have more speakers coming up for the rest of the week. We have another presentation tomorrow, a book presentation at 8:30. So join us for more of our wonderful presenters that have made a difference in our communities. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.